In this last Remnant Underground before Christmas, Michael Matt takes a brief trip down memory lane and reintroduces his son, Michael Matt. Meanwhile, Joe Biden, like the Energizer Bunny, is still beating the war drums in Ukraine, even though the entire world now knows it's over, Joe. And Italian traditional Catholics release a powerful new thesis which could settle the debate once and for all. Is Francis Pope or antipope? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Michael Matt. This is the Remnant Underground with birthday greetings now for Pope Francis. The Holy Father turns 87 years old next week, thus becoming the oldest reigning pontiff in 120 years. Alas, with advancing years and failing health, the Holy Father shows no signs of abandoning the quest to supplant the social reign of Christ the King with this bizarre, dystopian, globalist New World Order, which is falling on its face all over the place. Did you see I think there were 400 Ford dealers in this country last week announced they were refusing any more EVs from the Ford manufacturing company. Yeah. Because nobody wants it. I mean, everything about this great reset and all Agenda 2030, I don't know. It's getting really crazy. But Pope Francis is still dug in. He is not going to change. And I guess the question for us is, will Team Francis succeed now? And at this 11th hour, are they going to succeed in dividing and conquering what historian Henry Sear, what he calls Pope Francis's only real opposition worldwide, and that's us, traditional Catholics, the traditional Catholic movement. And it's true, it is. We've talked about this so many times. This poor guy is absolutely obsessed with his Traditionis Custodes and his attack on the Latin Mass, teaming up with the FBI to shut down the Latin Mass. He's obsessed with that opposition, which, as I've always said on this show, is actually a good sign. So will Francis now, in desperation, will he manage to divide the clans? Or put another way, are we going to allow him to divide us? That's the question, in other words, that I want to ask on this, our last Underground. We got the Christmas tree up, right? Even though it's still Advent, because this is going to be our last Underground before Christmas. There's going to be one more print edition of the Remnant before Christmas, or before the end of the year, but we'll be done with the Underground until well after Christmas, probably the first of the year. We do have a paper just off the press. Michael, can you bring that over? Thank you very much, sir. Have a seat. Michael, say hello. Say Merry Christmas to the clans around the world. Sit down, son. What are you waiting for? Christmas? Yeah, so this is the newest edition of the Remnant. I always just try to plug that to remind you that subscriptions to this newspaper pretty much fund everything. This is a good one. How you doing? Good. Excellent. Very good. Do you remember, I do have a question because we're talking about family and all of this stuff. Do you remember, pull into the light, son, you're in the shadows, like dark shadows. Oh, yeah, no, I'm in the light now. Do you remember the one you made a little cameo appearance from time to time on this show when you were a kid? Yeah. Yeah? How old are you now?
21, to be exact.
21, really?
No.
You're just playing with me, aren't you? How old? You're not 21. Invert that number. You're homeschooled, right? Just
12.
12. That's how's school going, by the way? Good. Yeah, that was. I'm feeling a little nostalgic, Walter. Yeah, what do you think? Can you dig that clip up from a few years ago? Yeah. Michael, what he's talking? John Wayne and whatever. Let's take a look at that. You want to? Yeah. All right, let's do it. Okay.
Who's your favorite cowboy?
John Wayne.
John Wayne. Okay.
And Will Wayne. So.
The Lone Ranger? You like the Lone Ranger? What's his horse's name?
Hybrid Sailboat.
I.O. Silver, absolutely. So you can see, we hope to do more family-oriented programs as well to kind of talk about some of the old customs and the old wonderful, joyful things that are still readily available to us. I mean, let's face it, Christendom, Catholic Christendom, created the greatest cultural expressions in the history of the universe, whether it's music or stories.
What exactly are you doing?
I may have been a little tired.
A little tired at the time you're yawning. You know what you're saying?
Oh yeah, I am.
Yawning. I guess I have that. I guess I have that.
A little tired, yeah.
I have that effect on people now and then. Thanks a lot, by the way. Yeah. You know what? You can take off now.
Oh, me? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thanks very much for joining the show. Get back to your key grip duties or whatever. Don't fall off the set, whatever you do. Thanks. I don't know, when was that, Walter? That's that clip was.
That was 2015, about 7 years ago.
Wow. The Italians say time is a gentleman, but man, that seems like about 7 minutes ago to me. And this was a long time before, like, the COVID nightmare. So much has changed. The COVID nightmare happen, which now seems just so surreal, right? We had in our case, we had the burning of Minneapolis, which was which was fun to watch. The whole defund the police movement, the destabilization of American cities and cities all across the world. And then that's followed up by the rise of Traditionis Custodes, the Gestapo to enforce Traditionis Custodes, which is still going on. Lots of boiling water under the bridge since that little clip happened. But the one thing, of course, that never changes here in our brave new world is our propensity to slouch towards Armageddon. Joe Biden is still at it.
Congress needs to pass supplemental funding for Ukraine before they break for the holiday resources. As simple as that. If Putin takes Ukraine, he won't stop there. It's important to see the long run here. He's going to keep going. He's made that pretty clear. If Putin attacks a NATO ally, then we'll have something that we don't seek and that we don't have today. American troops fighting Russian troops.
Those were some of, if not the, most insane remarks about anything, but about national security in particular, I've ever heard a commander-in-chief / president of the United States utter. Simply stunning. Everything there was a propagandistic, if you will, that's a kindness to him, lie.
You know, I've said it before, but it's just so monumentally embarrassing, you know, the representation that we Catholics now have around the world. I mean, some powerful people. I mean, this lying leader of the free world is a deluded, old, practicing Catholic. Here's Joe trotting off to Mass a few weeks ago. And speaking now of lying, loser, apostate Catholics,
I identify myself as a Catholic. I was raised, I was baptized, I was confirmed, I was married in the church. My children were baptized in the church. But as far as practicing it, it seems almost like a pro forma thing that I don't really need to do.
Yikes. What a menace. What a menace all of these modern Catholics have become. I mean, this is the, you know, Hitler, Mao, they all felt the same way, only they were atheists. And they left a similar number of dead bodies in their wake, but at least they were, for the most part, atheists, right? You know, Fauci's a Catholic. Joe Biden is a Catholic. Now, they're all over the place now. Emmanuel Macron, a Catholic, the little young globalist leader. The other little globalist leader, the little ferret up in Canada, Catholic. Nancy Pelosi, Catholic. AOC, Catholic. The insufferable AOC. Gavin Newsom, maybe your next president, Catholic. Antonio Guterres over at the United Nations, Catholic. Melinda Gates, Catholic. All baptized betrayers of the mystical body of Christ here in the springtime of Vatican II. And think about it, nobody bats an eye. Oh, that's just the new Catholics. That's what Catholic is now, you see? They're all practicing Catholics. Pro-abort, pro-gay marriage, practicing Catholics. And you still have people saying, well, you know, things are getting better in the Catholic Church. It's just a matter of unpacking the bags of Vatican II. We're going to get there. No, it's too late for that. It's over, right? People say, what about Francis? Is he Catholic? And I said, well, what does that even mean anymore? I mean, quite frankly, at this point, to freak out over Francis and his antics and his team, it really kind of reveals a short-sighted and very limited understanding of the revolution, of what's been going on in the Catholic Church ever since Vatican II and before, but certainly since Vatican II when the whole modernist revolution came out of the closet, so to speak. Francis didn't start this fire. He's just part of the continuum. I was born during the reign of Pope Paul VI. You remember Pope Paul VI, Saint Pope Paul VI. He's the guy that uncrowned the papacy for us. Now, Francis is all tied in with the New World Order. So was Pope Paul VI, right? Of course he was. You know, and believe you me, the first pope I ever heard talking about the New World Order was not Francis.
If all men and women, whatever the differences between them, cling to the truth with respect for the unique dignity of every human being, a new world order, a civilization of love can be achieved.
And to be fair, in 2009 Caritas in Veritate, even Benedict XVI, as grateful as we are for everything he did, especially liturgically, even he got into the act of calling for this new global governing body to manage the global economy, to bring about integral and timely disarmament, to guarantee the protection of the environment, and to regulate migration. There is an urgent need of a true world political authority. Because, as I said, it's been going on a long time. My father built this newspaper almost 60 years ago on the very same thing. Keep the faith, no matter what, because that's our first order of business as faithful Catholics. Keep the faith, even if it means resisting diabolically disoriented popes. Keeping in mind that in the Middle Ages, there were periods of time where the majority of Catholics had no idea who the Pope even was. Think about that. They didn't know who it was from 1 month, 1 year to the next who was occupying Peter's chair, but they continued to keep the faith, the age of faith, the age of lightness, of light, right, in the Catholic Church, the high Middle Ages. They're building cathedrals in honor of God, right? And the Blessed Mother, they're not sitting there worried about what the Pope is saying, what the Pope is doing, right? Because communications were such they didn't even know what he was saying, what he was doing, who he was, you see? Archbishop Lefebvre, here's another pioneer traditional Catholic. He brought this idea of resistance to the Pope, to a diabolically disoriented Pope. He brought this front and center on the world stage a long time ago. Here's what he said.
Nous adhérons de tout notre cœur, de toute notre âme, à la Rome catholique, gardienne de la foi catholique, et des traditions nécessaires au maintien de cette foi, à la Rome éternelle, maîtresse de sagesse et de vérité. Nous refusons par contre, et nous avons toujours refusé, de suivre la Rome de tendance néo-moderniste, néo-protestante, qui s'est manifestée clairement dans le Concile Vatican II, et après le Concile dans toutes les réformes qui en sont issues. Aucune autorité, même la plus élevée dans la hiérarchie, ne peut nous contraindre à abandonner ou à diminuer notre foi catholique.
Now, before you go to the usual bashing of that prince of the church, that archbishop who I firmly believe one day will be canonized as saint, keep in mind that what you just heard comes from the lips of a man who was a council father at Vatican II. Can any of you critics of Lefebvre say that? He was right at the heart of the thing, the entire time in the bowels of the Vatican, inside, watching what was going on. And within a few years of the close of the council, he said something's definitely gone very wrong. And he knew what he was talking about. He resisted a reigning pontiff for the same reason, to keep the faith. It was important to keep the faith. And these guys were modernists, revolutionaries in the church, right? And the same thing, another pioneer traditional Catholic, my friend and mentor, Michael Davies, he was talking about this in the pages of this newspaper every 2 weeks for 30 years. He was at Remnant forums 25, 30 years ago saying the exact same thing. Here's an example.
In fact, I'd go as far as to say that without Walter Mack, there would be no traditionalist movement in the United States. In the Remnant, he was able to articulate what thousands of dedicated American Catholics were beginning to feel, that the decomposition of the church in their country, which had reached alarming proportions by that year, 1967, was not the result of Rome being disobeyed, but due to the fact that Rome was being obeyed. We are perforce openly critical of papal policy. While it is admirable as well as natural to want to believe well of a vicar of Christ in his free-willed human personality, it is likewise commendable not to be able to gloss over either an Alexander VI or a Paul VI, and at the same time to be no whit perturbed in the faith by either.
Yeah, did you catch that? Don't be deterred in the faith because of errant popes, because of terrible popes. There have been terrible popes in the past, plenty of them. There are 500 years between the canonization of Pius V and the canonization of Pius X. 500 years of fairly good, but oftentimes ordinary, sometimes scoundrel popes, right? So nothing has changed for us today, certainly since what Michael Davies was just saying. It's exactly the same. We resist by uniting the clans of tradition, keeping the faith, and shouting from the housetops. That one thing that this revolution has been trying to stamp out literally for centuries. Long live Christ the King. The greatest battle cry in history. Viva Cristo Rey, shouted the Cristeros. Vive la Christoire, shouted the Vendéans, right? But neither Michael Davies, nor Archbishop Lefebvre, nor my father ever deviated from that. Long live Christ the King. What's under assault here is the social kingship of Christ. And through that counter-revolution, not one of them felt obligated to determine once and for all and for everybody whether or not the sitting pope at the time was legitimate, was antipope, how we should categorize him. They just proceeded with the resistance for the good of the church, to the extent that we can help the church as faithful Catholics, and for the good of souls, our own, their own included. And why didn't they think that was necessary? Because not one of them believed that they had the authority to make the call. Over at remnantnewspaper.com right now, my good friend and Remnant columnist Robert Morrison is covering the story. And the story involves a thesis that's been recently published by the renowned Italian journalist Marco Tossati. He's been around forever, highly respected, tradition-minded guy. His thesis now has been signed. It's called the Sede Menefragismo thesis. I think I got that right. To me, it sounds kind of like Sede Forget About It thesis, which is kind of actually sort of appropriate. The thing was signed by 9 prominent Italian Catholics when it first came out. I assume more people are getting behind it now. And it can loosely be translated to mean, I don't care if the seat is vacant or not. Now let's be clear before you jump. You don't care? Well, that's really important. Figure that out. True. That's not what they're saying. They're not saying it doesn't matter at all. Be clear. What they're saying, it's not because this doesn't matter. It clearly does matter. But rather because we don't care, because we all lack the authority to make the judgment. Even if all of our opinions are more or less valid points of discussion and can be made so or can be considered so, we don't have the authority, and that's what it's always been. So let's just read a little bit. So I'll have Walter throw some of this up on the screen. Here's what the Italians are writing in this piece. I'm going to put a link down below. I really would beg you to read it and to consider it prayerfully and carefully. But there's a paragraph, I think it's paragraph 11, which I want to read. Quote, due to the involvement of the Roman See itself in the crisis, it is legitimate to question the state of the papal see. It is a legitimate opinion to believe Jorge Mario Bergoglio is a true pope, albeit seriously heterodox. It is a legitimate opinion to consider Jorge Mario Bergoglio an illegitimate occupant of the see and or as an anti-pope. It is a legitimate opinion to consider the see vacant. It is a legitimate opinion to believe the headquarters, I assume they mean the Vatican, is only physically occupied. It is a legitimate opinion to consider the crisis of the Roman See as one of an heretical pope. It is a legitimate opinion to consider the crisis of the Roman See as one of a schismatic pope. It is a legitimate opinion to consider the post-conciliar popes to be true popes, even if marked by non-Catholic thought. Now, as you look at that, and as you read that, I'm sure something on that list applies to you. Something on that list applies to me. Much of it doesn't. The rest of the opinions do not apply to me. They're not my opinions. So what's the solution here? This is where I think this is just brilliant. I've been saying it for a long time. I'm not sure what difference it makes. I'm not sure what difference it makes getting the name of Francis right. We all need to band together and resist his destruction of the Catholic Church in the eyes of the world. That's the scandal. He's destroying the moral authority of the Catholic Church by flirting with this whole gay union blessing and so forth. I'm not sure it's that crucial, but the argument goes on. And this is, what is the solution, asked the Italians. And they say, since only the supreme authority of the Church can judge the issue relating to the Holy See, developing/supporting one thesis or another will be an exercise inevitably destined for non-solution. And they continue. The question, by definition, will remain open and unresolved until the end of the crisis. That is, until a certain judgment by the supreme authority of the Church.
How could anyone disagree with this?
I'm not sure.
I think we all would agree on it.
I think if you really think about it, and you're not just trying to win points, on Facebook or Twitter, for yourself and for your position that you dug in on, I think you do. I think you almost have to agree with this. This is extremely logical, extremely Catholic, and it allows everyone to come together and say, okay, we're going to wait and see what God wants to do here. I don't have to hate you anymore. Thank God, Merry Christmas. You know what I mean? And the Italians then, they conclude with, again, something I just can't imagine why we all can't get behind wherever we come down on this. They say, quote, differences of opinion regarding the see can never be a reason for division, as they are disputable opinions and not certain truths. Now that's just a fact. You can say all day long, well, I as a faithful Catholic, I simply must make this decision because I have to be clear, blah, blah, blah. That's your opinion once again. So I really feel that if I feel the need, or if you, I'm gonna leave it at me. If I feel the need to excoriate you for your opinion on this, trust me, I'm just putting my personal opinion above everything else. It's all very personal. Sorry, but it's just pride on my part. I want to win the debate. And in defense of my personal opinion, I'm wasting time attacking you, attacking Cardinal Burke, attacking Bishop Schneider, whoever you're attacking who's saying, that person doesn't matter because he differs with my opinion. We're wasting time attacking those good people who understand most of the problem in the church today, who have the authority to do something about it or raise awareness much more than we. We're attacking them. You see? That's been the problem all along. We're attacking people who know there's a massive, unprecedented, apocalyptic crisis in the church, rather than working with them to most effectively undermine that crisis, that revolution against the church that we all love. No matter where we come down, we all love it the same way. Does this make any sense to you? Or does it seem like a diabolical diversion, right? Let's make this the hill that we die on. Really? I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, and Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord. I believe in the Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the resurrection of the dead. Right? We all agree on this. We absolutely agree on the essentials of what it means to not only be Catholic, but to survive, to preserve the faith. So why are we attacking each other on this one? This is exactly, friends, this is why I wanted to end this year's programming, by sending us into the new year, just reminding everybody, I don't care, people who agree with me, people who disagree with me, all of us, get over ourselves and remember this. This circular firing squad is how we lose and Team Francis wins. It's exactly what they want to do. They're polarizing the whole world, aren't they? You see it in politics, Biden, everybody. What's the name of the game? Polarize everybody, split everybody apart. Don't let them talk. Let them become isolated, right? On their own, little isolated ships, right? Little rowboats, little dinghies. That's what they want. Turn on each other and we win. Divide and conquer and we win. Again, divide in this case with the historian Henry C., a man I respect. I've met this man, I respect him very much. What he calls the Pope's only real opposition in the world today. If he's right, and I believe he is, we have an obligation to live up to that and to do this right and to understand that there are certain people who are going to have different opinions than ours, but who are also working to help the church, to help souls, to restore traditional Catholicism, to proclaim the kingship of Christ. They are not our enemies. It's supremely counterproductive to attack them. So what's the litmus test? If you are talking to somebody about this issue and they feel the need to constantly be tearing down Schneider or Burke or Mueller or whoever it is, or Vigano, tear them all down, if they don't agree with me, that's a problem. That's your red flag. Because we're all trying to muddle through this. We're all trying to figure this out. And by the way, even Archbishop, my friend Archbishop Vigano, he admits that not one of us has the authority to make this call. Does that surprise you? He just said it.
What we cannot do, because we do not have the authority, is to officially declare that Jorge Mario Bergoglio is not Pope. The terrible impasse in which we find ourselves makes any human solution impossible.
Archbishop Vigano and I don't agree on exactly the best strategic way forward, but what he said right there is exactly right. God bless him for saying it. You know why? Because that settles it. This is always what he just said, has always been the one point, the main point of contention ever since Vatican II. We do not have the authority to make this call, even if we believe it in our hearts. We don't have the authority. But what we can agree on, I hope, finally, that is there is absolutely no reason on God's green earth for us to be anathematizing each other over what even Archbishop Vicano calls a terrible impasse which makes any human solution impossible. You see? I'm really excited about this. I'm so glad that Marco Tossati and his team have done this, and it's getting wide play all around the world, all over the internet. It's very, very important to prayerfully consider what they're saying, because they're really not taking sides with anybody. They're kind of taking sides with everybody, saying, yeah, guys, you know, but we got to get over ourselves, and we got to continue to fight together, united. Personally, I make no secret about it. I happen to believe that by some diabolical aegis, Francis is still the Pope. It's what I believe. And that's the problem, as I've said before. That's the chastisement, in my opinion. That's the crisis. But people who don't accept that, because they tell me I'm cowardly. I'm afraid to say it like it is. I'm just trying to sell subscriptions to this newspaper, and that's why, you know what I mean? Like, that's just got to stop. I've been at this for 50 years. If anybody's been at it longer than I have, please let me know. That for a long time, we've seen this, the back and forth, the ebb and flow, the squabbling, the fighting, the fracturing that goes on. If we don't get this right, it's time to get it right. And you can mock me for my position if you want to. I don't care. But I have a feeling, speaking of mockery, that the first Christians would have been similarly mocked, right, for accepting the divinity of this dead man hanging from a cross. Don't you think? Don't you think that might have been one of the bitter pills to swallow on the first Good Friday? You still think this guy was God? What's the matter with you? Right? It's mystery of iniquity. It's difficult. It's mystery. There was no clarity. God's ways are not our ways. No clarity for them, for the first Christians. When Jesus said from the cross, consummatum est, can you imagine? But as I see it, again, it's just my opinion, we're called to suffer with the crucified mystical body of Jesus Christ, just as the first Christians were called to suffer with the crucified body of Jesus Christ. And you don't have to agree with me on this, and I'm not asking you to. It's merely my opinion that even a struck shepherd inadvertently fosters unity, because that unity comes with the sheep staying in the fold anyway, where there's safety against the wolves in numbers, right? That's why we always talk about unite the clans. The sheep get together and at least try your hardest to fend off the wolves together. The unity that comes from doing that and from praying together for the missing shepherd or for the hireling shepherd, right? Resisting his errors together, calling him back to the flock, right? As St. Catherine of Siena did with the Pope in her time. This is how we see it. And then in the meantime, if we can keep the clans united, homeschool our children, come out from among them, in other words, as St. Paul says, keep ourselves united in the old faith, keep hope alive, we remain in the company. Now, this is the human consolation that we didn't have 40, 50 years ago. We remain in the company of a substantial now remnant of Christendom. And that remnant now, it's not so tiny anymore, friends. I'm going to leave you with this. It's not so tiny anymore. That remnant of Christendom includes the entire Society of St. Pius X. That's 750 priests. The entire Fraternity of St. Peter, something like 500 priests. The entire Institute of Christ the King. The Society of the Good Shepherd. Thousands of diocesan priests who came over after Summorum Pontificum and who now agree with us that keeping the faith, preserving the old liturgy, trumps everything else. That's a substantial remnant that we're standing with right now. So there really is no reason to lose hope. At the same time, the Novus Ordo Church is dying. It's literally on life support now, while tradition is rising up all over the world, as traditionalist pioneers such as Michael Davies incredibly predicted would happen. This is about 25 years ago.
There is no longer a crisis in the church. A crisis in medical terms is a point at which the patient can recover or after which he'll die. We've now passed the point in the church in the English-speaking world where it can recover. In Rome, mass attendance is now 2%. And the Pope is the actual Bishop of Rome. He said recently, now in the new millennium, the fruits of Vatican II are beginning to appear. when he's the only person going to Mass in Rome, I don't know if you're so bitter. So the mainstream church is going to continue to decline, but we're going to continue to grow slowly, and there will literally only be a vestigial Catholic presence in the English-speaking world in 20 to 30 years' time. But I hope a substantial proportion of that, perhaps a majority, will be traditional Catholics. It's quite likely that within 10 years in France, more people will be going to the traditional Mass than to the new Mass.
Michael Davies died just a few years after that. He never lived to see Summorum Pontificum, although he always knew it was coming. They all did. They all knew that the revolution was doomed to fail in God's good time. And that was the beautiful thing about what was going on back then. This isolated little remnant of people that hung on when they didn't have any affirmation from anyone. They had one archbishop, to turn to, and yet they had this incredible confidence in the providence of God. Michael Davies would not have been surprised today to see Cardinals Burke and Muller and these guys, bishops, archbishops, standing with us, standing with tradition, resisting modernists in high places to their faces, exactly as it's happening right now. It's a benefit that we have. It's a grace that we have. Friends, I have to wrap up. As I say, we're coming into Christmas. We're all trying to hang on. We got a big year coming up in 2024. I think it's going to be a year from hell. So we got to get ready for it, but we don't want to despair. And I want to leave you with this thought, a personal reflection. I just remember clearly what it was like to feel really alone in this fight, when I was a kid. This today, what's going on, this is not that. We are not alone. And the only thing now, that's what kind of the purpose of this show. The only thing that can change that can blow us apart, that can divide the clans of tradition, the only thing is us. Francis can't control that. This is up to us. So we got to make sure it doesn't happen, right? It's Christmas, and honestly, I am so filled with hope looking at this situation, even despite how bad everything is. Because you know why? Because they threw everything they had at us, at tradition, at the old church, at the old man, everything, tried everything. Well, look around you. They're the ones who are growing old. They're the ones who are running out of ideas and running out of steam, and they're just becoming angry now and bitter. While we, and by we I mean the traditional Catholic movement, the clans worldwide, we, on the other hand, are absolutely full of life. We're animated by hopeful expectations for the future. We have an army of homeschool moms out there bringing up their kids in the traditional faith. Our chapels bursting at the seams with babies, young families. Everybody's talking about it all over the world, right? Michael Davies mentioned that in France, the traditional Latin Mass was going to, at some point, he said within 10, 15 years, is probably going to eclipse the attendance at the Novus Ordo. Well, guess what? In a few months, 20,000 traditional Catholics, young people, average age of 22 years old, are going to be marching across France on a short pilgrimage. I'm going to be with them. And they're going to pray with one voice. They're going to march together. They're going to worship God. They're going to sing together. They're going to be united in the Latin Mass that was supposedly abrogated. When I was a kid, they said it was never coming back. Well, now this Latin Mass is back, despite the best efforts of Francis to stop it. And that Latin Mass in Chartres is going to be offered by one of the most powerful theologians in the church today, the former head of the CDF under Pope Benedict XVI. Can you believe that? Can you believe it? That's what's happening. That's the hand of God, friends. We can't blow this. We have to keep this momentum going, not only for the future of the church, which is in God's hands anyway, but for all of us, for our children, for the salvation of souls. And at Chartres, it's going to be so clear. That's why so many people go back, because they get to see this microcosm of Christendom rising again. And it becomes clear not only to them, but to everyone watching from all over the world, that although the revolution tried everything to make the remnant of believers despair, they failed. They failed miserably because we're still here. The little people, the clans of tradition all over the world. We have to keep that together. Nothing is more important than that. Honestly, I get it. It's really dark right now. But the thing is, friends, this is what we need to keep in mind in everything that we do. God and history know how this ends. Only God and history know how this will end. The first Christians saw the first pope deny Christ 3 times. They saw one of the original 12 bishops betray him and then kill himself in despair. They saw God crucified, whipped, scourged, crucified and die on a cross. And then they saw their children, their little kids, become food for lions. But they kept the faith. And they kept the faith without the consolation of knowing what we now know, that their blood and the blood of their children was watering the tree of Christendom. It would flower into the greatest civilization the world has ever seen. And that's what I mean by we don't know God's will. We don't know. And we just have to keep on keeping on. There was no pope at all. I'm talking about Christmas. There was no pope at all when the shepherds went over to Bethlehem to see God reset the world. There was no pope at all when 3 kings, 3 wise men, cast themselves on the ground in faith and love of the Redeemer of the world. And if you've ever been to Bethlehem, you know that a person has to actually stoop down, become almost like a little child, just to get through the opening of the place where Christ was born. And maybe that tells us something, right? It's a lowly place for lowly people, for little people who maybe don't have all the answers, just like us, but who at least are willing to become like little children, to see the little baby lying in the manger and to worship him as king. And what's happening in Rome right now, what was happening in Rome back then when Christ was born, they didn't know, they didn't care. Pagans were doing pagan things, right? Today, what's happening in Rome, I don't know. Really, friends, who cares? You know? What matters most are the things that we believe. What matters most is keeping the faith. What matters most is staying together and realizing and proclaiming that Christ the King is born. And we still believe. And we will never stop believing. And because of that confidence and because of that faith and because of that love, we can say with certitude, absolute certitude, that this God-forsaken revolution has failed. That Herod will fail again. That Caesar will fail again. But that the child of Bethlehem is King of the world. And on that, dear friends, glory to God, right? Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace to the clans of goodwill. Merry Christmas, and God bless you all.